let's jump right into this and kind of talk about where we find ourselves at this particular moment in history. And I want to start with some really interesting information from Gallup. And they've been measuring sort of trust in institutions for well over 30 years. And if you look at where we're at, we trust organized religion less than we have Supreme Court, the media, business, and government, all less than we ever actually have in the times that the 30 years that this has been going on, especially on the government, especially on the media. And this is not surprising, right? If we were to split this call, we would probably find people all over the spectrum in terms of who we trust, what we trust, the sources we trust, and more specifically, the ones that we don't. And so this is a really interesting time as we go through this, because we ultimately have all of this mistrust that actually goes into business as well. And everybody is looking at every decision they make, assuming that somebody is out there trying to get the better of them. And so with this as a backdrop, it really impacts how we address the client experience. It's one of the big macro trends that is really, really important. And I'll talk about how we can kind of de-risk this a little bit and some of the things that we see working on that side. We also are at a point where client expectations have never been higher. 86% of clients say the quality of the customer experience is a top factor in how they choose a staffing firm. This is from a PricewaterhouseCoopers study. Our own study found that 98% of clients expect a response to calls or emails within 24 hours. Now, just think about that piece of it. In fact, what we found was 2/3 expect a returned call or email within 4 hours. So we have this huge expectation for unprecedented responsiveness. We expect immediate answers to our questions whenever we can get them. And that really impacts what we're able to do as a staffing firm. And then half of clients said that they've had a negative customer experience with a professional services firm in the past year. This is not unique to staffing, but across this side, Forrester found that about half of clients have had some kind of a negative experience as a part of this. So we have all of these expectations. We have this sort of overlay of a lack of trust in our major institutions, including staffing firms and businesses. And we also have this, which is that we are going to the experts and we're saying, okay, what do you think is going to happen to jobs? And specifically in staffing, obviously, this matters a lot to us, not just what actually happens to jobs, which is very obvious, but also the perception of what the experts think is going to happen to jobs impacts as well, right? Because something doesn't have to be true for it to be perceived. And if something is perceived, for example, if the perception of our clients are that we are headed towards a rocky time or a recession, then that's going to impact what they actually do, even if their own business is actually doing pretty well. So when we look at this, what I'm showing on the screen is the actual jobs added over the last 18 months versus the estimated jobs, the Wall Street Journal consensus estimate of jobs that were going to be added as part of that. And what you see here is the green line is what the actual was. And especially as we went through 2022 and the first couple months of 2023, what we saw was that dramatically different estimates from the actuals that came out initially. And those get adjusted, up and down a little bit after that. But I just want to drive this home for a second, right? When you look at this chart, what you're seeing here is the people that are supposed to know the most about what's going to happen and what is happening in the jobs report are missing, oftentimes so badly that they're literally missing by 2x or 1.5x. And in fact, when you look at it over since January 2022, the consensus estimates have underestimated new job creation by an average of 27%. This is the type of stuff that should get you fired if it wasn't such a hard and difficult economy to predict right now. I mean, if we were doing a drinking game where we got to take a drink over the last year, every time somebody predicted a recession, we would have all spent the last year and a half drunk, right? And so we have to take this into account because this is very real for us because it's very real to our clients. And this is the best sources of information that they have. And in fact, when we actually go into the headlines, what we see is more bad news, right? And so we saw all the layoffs, especially in big tech, that were happening there as a part of that. And so when you look at that, and we kind of all, hopefully on this call, are a little bit close enough to this to be like, okay, well, that's very specific to one industry. And in fact, when we look at this, we look at the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics JOLTS survey, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. What we see here is since 2020, sort of coming out of the recession, we see pretty flat on the layoffs and discharges. In fact, a little bit lower now than it was in late 2020. And when we look at that, how that compares to the pre-pandemic average, what we find is that from March 2009, starting to come out of that last recession to February 2020, what we see is that we're really still, even now with the latest data, a little bit below those historical averages. And then, all the news last year was the quitting and the quiet quitting and the sometimes loud quitting. And now, we're hearing that, okay, people aren't quitting anymore. But that's not really true either, because what we see is, yes, it is coming down from the peak in 2022. But look at how it sits above what we've actually seen historically there as a part of it. It's a really dramatic difference. On average, we have about 1.8 million people that get laid off each month and about 2.7 million that quit. And yet, even in the most recent estimates, that's closer to 4 million that are quitting there as part of that. So let's even jump in. Well, okay, that makes sense. But in tech, it's got to be different, right? I know a lot of IT staffing firms are on the call today here as well. So let's kind of take a look at it, right? Here's layoffs, and the industry sector is called information. It's not a perfect, synergistic view of all big tech or all software or all IT, but it's as close as we can get within their data. And what we see is that the layoffs are really, they bumped up a little bit off and on, but they're not actually dramatically above the historical averages there as well. And then when we look at the quits, what we see is the quits have not come down much at all. And the quits within the IT space or in the information space, about 1.4 million people quit each month. And you can see here, we're well above that. So those with mobility in their jobs are often still taking that mobility is what we're finding. So there's a lot of actually really good information that's actually going to help us continue to grow in the rest of 2023 into 2024, in my opinion. You don't have to be great at your Econ 101 class to understand that supply and demand are still ultimately in our favor, even though they're starting to relegate a little bit. There's still a lot of mobility. There's still a lot of people hiring. There's still a lot of open jobs. There's still a lot of people looking for work. And in fact, that's growing a little bit. So what does that mean for us as we kind of get into the impact? And what I believe it means is that the 2024 playbook for staffing has really changed. And you heard David mention this as he was talking about the focus that we've had on the candidate and the candidate experience. And that was really long overdue. And what we see now and what we're seeing some of our top firms that we work with do is really take that same lens and looking at, okay, we've focused a lot on improving the candidate experience throughout the entire candidate journey. Now let's take a look at what that client journey looks like. And are we adding value? Are we doing the types of things that not only draw people to us, but keep them with us time and time again? And there's a number of things that I think will be really helpful here as a part of this. The first of which is de-risking. One of the biggest things that we see in economic uncertainty is that that the perception around value goes up. And so you see a lot more open-ended comments in the survey responses asking about value. In fact, we did this analysis just the other day and on a handful of firms. And what we found is that typically the number of people that mentioned the cost as an issue or a suggestion for improvement was about double what it was during the last survey that they did, which was roughly last year. And so we are seeing that you're having to focus and prove out your value a little bit more. In addition to that, when you're looking at people that are considering working with you, we can't just be considered the best choice. We have to also be considered the least risky choice. right? And it makes sense when everything's going well and we all feel like we're doing great things and we've got positive things ahead of us. We're a little more likely to take a risk on something because we don't feel like it'll be that detrimental if it doesn't go through because everything else is going reasonably well. Well, that changes when we get into these times of economic uncertainty. And so we have to focus not just on how we tell the story, but how we prove this story, not just on how we are the best fit for this particular prospect and the types of positions that they need to hire for, but also how by making that choice, they're also making the least risky choice as a part of that. And that is fundamentally different, right? If we're trying to say that we're the best fit, we're showing them, what we can do in the space, and we're showing them the things that we do well. If we're trying to show them that we are the least risky, we're showing them all of the times that we've done it for people just like them. We're showing them how we can ensure, how our process can ensure that we're going to deliver a successful outcome at a higher rate than our competitors are. Those are the types of things that you really want to be able to see. It's a really critical piece there as a part of it. Next, as we look at this, you are not a credible cheerleader in a time of economic uncertainty. In fact, I would argue that we've gone past the time where we are actually credible as our own cheerleaders. And when you look at this, and we'll make David answer this question when he comes back on as well, but my belief is that we went through a number of eras, right? As a marketer, we went through the actual era of sort of advertising, and it was all about getting our message out there and having a brand. And then the next version of this, I think, was storytelling, right? Where we were actually telling a story through the content and through the knowledge. And you heard Brad talk about this on the last session, and I think it's really right. And I think this next era that we're in is sort of the amplifier of the storytelling, right? So we need to be adding value through our thought leadership and our content and showing, again, that we are the least risky option because we know the most about this particular segment. But we also need to find the ways to where we're not talking about how great we are, but we're amplifying the voices of all of the people that have had a positive experience working with us. And that is ultimately what is credible. I could tell you how great I think Clearly Rated is. It won't matter nearly as much as if one of our customers says it, right? And that's what we have to look at. You guys are all delivering exceptional outcomes, at least some of the time. Some are better than others, right? But you have at least some success in there. You need to amplify that success, find ways to really push that out. We're finding that within our system, the testimonials, the shout outs, those types of things getting utilized on the front end, top of funnel is really, really critical and is moving the needle for people on not just the new accounts, but also the ability to expand within your existing accounts, which for a lot of people is the best place to grow. And again, as you look at that, if we're de-risking, the least risky option is one that's already working. And so we need to identify those opportunities and make sure that we're not giving them any reason to go shop elsewhere as a part of this. Now, this one, I'm a huge fan of The Rock, right? Now, there are a lot of rocks, but there's only one The Rock, right? And during times of economic uncertainty, I would encourage you to go through this exercise, right? If you are making placements, corporate controllers on the finance side, right? You could use us to help you find your next corporate controller because that's something that we do as a staffing firm, right? And that claim right there, if that's all the tighter your claim is, you're going to have a lot of competitors, and it's going to be a game. You're going to win sometimes, but it's going to be because you have the lower price. It's going to be because you happen to hit the right time, the right place. You're not going to get that much help from your actual, marketing and brand position there as a part of that. So a tighter claim is, you should use us because we place more controllers than anyone in the metro area. Well, that's a much stronger claim, right? If you can actually get to this point where you say, hey, we're actually really much better at this than almost anybody else in this area. Now you probably have taken it from, a dozen or 2 dozen competitors down to maybe 4 or 5. But what you really want to get to is you must use us if you want access to real-time benchmarking data on finance salary ranges, right? Whatever that may be. This is just an example. But what is that one thing that if they believe that that's important, they have to use you because you do it better than anybody else, because you're the only one that has that key thing. And so really powerful exercise. And it really takes you down to, okay, now it's not a question of whether I'm convincing them to use me. I need to convince them that this is as important as I think it is, right? And if you have something that is really seen as important, that is unique to you, that has outsized value in times of economic uncertainty. We want to make sure that we're not sharing opinions, that we are sharing data and facts, right? When you have a claim, for example, that, boy, this is a really tight labor market, extremely difficult to find mechanics at less than $33 per hour in our area. If your recruiter says that, depending on when they say that, it is either kind of influential, right? If they're saying it at the start as they're taking that rec, then it's a little bit influential, right? You're consulting, you're giving some guidance, and then it's a question of, do they really believe you, or do they think you're just trying to get your bill rate and your pay rate up and make that easier, right? If you bring that up after 2 weeks of searching and you haven't had success, now it comes across as being an excuse. But if you can actually take that data and put it there and say, look, there are currently 3 open positions for every available person with the training to be a mechanic in this area. 84% of the job openings in this range are offering $35 per hour or more. Now you're actually not putting yourselves in a place where somebody can agree or disagree. Those are just the facts, right? If you have access to that data, then that becomes the facts. And then you can focus not on whether or not they are going to believe that the premise is true, but you can focus on, let's get on the same side of this as partners and get creative about how we find this. Well, maybe we can get down below that $33 an hour if you limit this restriction on language preference. If you limit this restriction on, you need 5+ years of experience. Well, what if we drop that to 2+ years experience? We're getting somebody a little more green, but now we've opened this door to be able to find people that we want. So make sure that you really have that in place in a way that you can actually come to the table with as much data as possible. Don't drop the other balls to rush to clients. One of the things that we see, we've measured Net Promoter Score, which is just simply the willingness to recommend your primary staffing firm. We've measured this for 15 years now on the client side. And what's interesting is that what you saw is during 2009 and during 2020, we saw a peak in higher satisfaction scores with clients. And then it goes right back down, right? So when we're scared that we're going to lose our clients, we tend to do those nice little things. We're a little more responsive. We're give them a little bit more care. All of those items is a part of it. When we're not in that mode, what we find is that we're actually doing less of that. And so as an industry, historically, what we've seen is we focus on the clients or the candidates, and what we really want to do is make sure that we focus more on the clients now without losing all of the gains that we've made over the last few years with that candidate experience. We need to understand that this is not your parents' staffing industry, right? I remember this ad. Some of you, I'm probably dating myself now, but this is not your father's Oldsmobile. And it was Oldsmobile's attempt to say, hey, we need to get this next generation of buyers. And that's really true in the staffing space as well. Gen Y or younger makes up over half of the workforce today. By 2029, it'll be 2/3 of the workforce. They're not just the people that we're placing, who actually closer to 65 or 70% when we've looked at it, of the people that we place in this industry are Gen Y or younger. They're not just the people we're placing on assignments. They're not just our internal employees, who also disproportionately tend to be Gen Y or younger. They're also now our buyers and our users. And that means that we have to continue to evolve and evolve even faster. Times of economic uncertainty allow us and force us to make difficult decisions about what's working, what's important, where we're going to focus on, and where we have the greatest impact for our clients. I would just encourage you to don't just batten down the hatches. Don't put your head in the sand and wait until it's back, but actually take those steps forward. You heard Brad talking a little bit about AI, and David and the team talking a little bit about AI. And I would just encourage you, technology is a huge impact. Our clients want it. Our candidates want it. That user experience can be really positively or negatively impacted based on the technology that you employ. The productivity of your team can be very positively or negatively impacted based on the technology that you deploy. How you get feedback, how you amplify the success stories is really critical on the type of software that you deploy as a part of this. That being said, Don't dehumanize this. Use technology to rehumanize the experience. During times of economic uncertainty, we need to be really good at alleviating the stress of our clients. And that means that we have to be close enough to be able to even understand when they're experiencing stress. And last but not least, look, today's headwind is tomorrow's tailwind. This has happened every single time in this industry. We saw it coming out of the pandemic response, where everything that starts as a headwind eventually turns and becomes a tailwind in the next economic cycle. So for those that are feeling like, look, we're just trying to hold our ground and not step backwards, just know that there's going to be a time where you're going to have to run and run fast, because everybody's going to run fast and run faster than usual, because that tailwind is going to help all of us. And we need to be ready for that. So take the time to really make sure that you're holding your client experiences close. You're staying close to them, getting feedback, making sure that you're not leaving yourself vulnerable, and get ready to run. Because I personally think that by the second half of this next year, we're going to be running as an industry again. And I think it's going to be really, really exciting. So with that, I want to make sure that we have some time for questions, and God knows I don't want anybody to be late for lunch on my account. So, David, do we have any questions in the tab there?
Right now, there's no questions in the Q&A, but please go ahead and submit them. I've got a couple for you.
Yeah.
You were just talking about the rehumanize using technology, and we're certainly, I've watched the digital transformation explosion in the last few years. I'm really curious about the integration of bots and automation, and in what impact it has on NPS. Have you seen that correlation?
Yeah. What I think is that the biggest impact that it has on NPS, right? If you think about NPS, which is, how likely are you to recommend XYZ staffing firm to a friend or colleague, embedded in that is the expectation and the perceived experience, right? And so, for example, if I go into McDonald's and order a cheeseburger, I have a different expectation on speed and quality than if I go into a Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and order a burger as a part of that. And what we're seeing in terms of the automation specifically is that it's changing the expectations. When you look at Gen Y or younger, that the concept of a chatbot or things along those lines is not necessarily a turnoff like it is. Like if you put a chatbot up for my mother, like she would never spend another dollar with you, right? But if you don't have a chatbot up for my niece and she's trying to figure something out as a 26-year-old, you're going to also not see another dollar from her. And so we have to the way that I look at it, David, is that the technology is the freeway that everybody wants to be on, because they can go as fast as they want to, but they want that freeway to have a lot of exit ramps. And those exit ramps are the people with the expertise, the context, the people that can answer their questions, that can help them be a better utilizer of that technology and to help them get to their goals.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I was laughing when you talked about mom going there. I was just thinking about both of my parents who, when they wanted to take a flight, would say, "We're going to the airport to buy a ticket." I'm like, I don't even think you can buy a ticket at the airport. What are you trying to do?
Yeah. My mother-in-law texted me the other day, David, and the text said, and I quote, "Do you know how the internet works?" That was the entirety of the text. No other context, no specific question. It was just that. So it's all about where you were and how you grew up on technology.
Love it. We just had a question come in, and let me just read it to you. I find it interesting that you talk about lowering risk. Yet my experience has been that companies refuse to change recruitment partners. Your thoughts? I'm also interested in your thoughts on outsourcing companies like Accenture, who are third-party recruitment partners who have dehumanized recruiter relationships.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that have had a negative impact on recruiter relationships, right? And a lot of times, VMS and different aspects of it. And to some extent, we've been a little bit a victim of how we've kind of approached that role, right? For every recruiter that is a really consultative expert in their space, there's a lot of recruiters that are, just doing a search and providing the responses back. That's the perception and the feedback that we get in the space. And so when you look at something like Accenture, or you look at, people that are getting approached and saying, "Hey, let's cut off this relationship with the recruiter. For some of them, they're not perceiving that they're losing that much, right? They're getting time back, or they're maybe getting a better price in their mind, and they don't perceive that they're losing that much. And so one of the things I think we have to continue to do is to really focus on that recruiter as an expert and giving them the tools and the data to really be that expert role. And then also really, one of the biggest things that we see is like, they don't know what they know, right? Which is like, they know a ton, but they don't actually have the confidence always to sit across from an executive that's maybe 10 years their senior, and speak confidently on that, because they either don't have the data, or they're forgetting that in almost every room that the recruiter's sitting in, or almost every Zoom call, they've been involved in more hires than any client that's on that side, right? And so they're certainly more involved with hires right now. And there's a lot of expertise that could be passed on, but we don't always do that. We oftentimes allow ourselves to be order takers, as opposed to consultative talent advisors. And so I think that's the big thing in terms of the turnover. That certainly there are cases where that is. When we've looked at the data internally, there's actually quite a bit of turnover on the client side. But I will say too that, again, if you're trying to de-risk it, find a way to go in and make it really easy for them to give you a couple recs and let you work a couple recs. And if you can add enough value in there, then you kind of open that door to expand that.
I think some of that ties back to the presentation Brad Biley did earlier, where he was talking about how you're positioned. So you could be the world's greatest recruiter. You could have deep subject matter knowledge. But when you hand somebody your card, you send them a connection request on LinkedIn, they see that your job title is a recruiter. Yeah. You're instantly in the box with whatever their perception of that word is. And now You're digging yourself out of the box. And that's really tough to do. You don't actually... you want to do your personal branding, whether you're a solo recruiter or you're a recruiter in a firm. You want to do your personal branding so you're in your own box. And you said it, Eric, as the subject matter expert that has valuable information to share, that has confidence in their ideas. And you don't have to know the world. You just need to know a lot about something small that's important to that person you're calling on. And another question that just popped in. Are you seeing survey fatigue? Because everybody's got a post-event survey. And then how do you get around that fatigue to get meaningful feedback?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've tracked response rates for over a decade. And they're definitely, the trend is a little bit like this, a little bit down and to the right. However, what we're still seeing is, I think, average response rate well over 25% on the client side. But there's a tremendous amount of variance. We have a top 10 industrial staffing firm that has a response rate of over 40%, and surveys multiple times a year. We have another one that is struggling to get to 10%. So it has a lot to do when you look at whether or not somebody responds to a survey. It is simply their perception of the cost versus the value, and the cost for them is time. Right. So what you want to do is you want to really reinforce that this is going to take a minute, 2 minutes of their time. And the value is anything actually going to change with this? And so you have to really reinforce the things that you're doing based on that feedback, so that the next time you go out for feedback, they don't just go, oh, I'm not going to do this. It's going to go into a black hole and not change what we're doing. So I think that that's a key piece. The other thing that we're starting to see is an evolution to less of a client survey and more of a client health form, right? Which opens us up now to ask questions about opportunities that are coming up. How else can we help you? How can we be proactive? What are the types of things that you're struggling with? Is it retention? Is it attraction? Is it wages? And that allows then the staffing firm to go in, and again, that recruiter can go in and add value. And I know we're at time, so the last thing I want to say on this, David, is you talk a little bit about the recruiters getting pigeonholed. And one of the best pieces of advice that I had, that I give to any recruiter that I run into, is start adding value before you ever get any kind of economic return on that. And what that means is, like, oftentimes what we want to do is we convince somebody to actually start paying our firm, which then pays us. And then we are looking at how we add value. And that's really wrong, right? We should just look at, okay, have I added value to every one of my prospects? Have I shared information? Have I shared, some of the key insight from other conversations I'm having? And that's ultimately how we kind of get to the point where we can then bring that forward and somebody comes to us and says, hey, you've added a lot of value. Let's have a conversation and see if this is a fit.
Yeah, 100%. We've used the analogy, it's a bank account. Let's make some deposits before we try to make a withdrawal. We're not trying to be a bank robber.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
Eric, this is awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights. As always, great stuff. Thanks for joining us.